been reading I still don't have your books, so I had to read your articles.
But maybe they give a better idea in a concise way of the ideas.
Yeah, but I love the books. I love the book. I enjoy reading the book. So this is gonna happen. I don't know, maybe next weekend. So what I suggest you is the most useful for us is if we follow the document I send you, which is called Cultural Claims. And I would like to begin asking you about the mobility term. So you have one of your articles is about theorizing. One of the articles I have is about theorizing mobility through concepts and figures. So in which you provide an anthropological perspective of this debate. We have been talking mostly, with sociologists, with geographers, economists. So I think it's good if at the beginning I asked you about your impression of the mobility term and what the anthropological view adds and enriches this, if you agree. And then it's not an answer of one word, yes or no. It's, you have to take your time. You have to take your time.
Yeah.
And then I would like to ask you about, let's say, if you believe that we are witnessing, we are in a moment that there is a cultural change in relation to life in general, but mobility in particular. So if the slow movement by Carlo Nore, the slow food movement by Carlo Petrini, all of this is actually all the traffic calm, environmental zones on urbanism, slow cities. All of this is really relevant, or is a sign of cultural change, or this is just,
So I can disagree with that if I want.
Okay, so you disagree with that? That's perfect.
No. I mean, it's. I think it's more complex. The thing is that anthropologists, and this is why anthropologists are not often invited in news, because we try to render the complexity of life, and the complexity of life is always gray. So it's neither black or white. It's always yes, but, or no, but.
Yeah. That's cool. Okay, my role is simplifying like a journalist, and your role is bringing complexity and more interest. Then I would like to ask about these art and fiction books and even songs, popular songs, which are, it seems, also in the same direction. The book by Milan Kundera on the slowness, and there are popular songs even by Julio Iglesias. Me esquecer de vivir. This? Me esquecer de vivir. I forget.
Maybe, it's not my style of music, but
it's good to sleep, in the afternoon. But he says, in this life, always running and running and running as efficient as possible. I forget about living, in the sense that I'm running so fast I don't know where I'm going. And this is in the popular songs, there is in the art, there are some movies, always have been in the history of human beings. But maybe in the Western world, this is becoming more respectful. I would like you to say something about art and popular art and
popular culture.
Popular culture, yes. Then I would like, I don't know what you think about Byung-Chul Han, the South Korean philosopher, but the Xen of Time is something we have been reading a lot, and I would like to ask you something about that. So our culture overestimates the value of speed and efficiency. If we live in a time which is not more accelerated but desynchronized, so this experience of time that we have, and somehow this is very much related to what you say of staying attached to belong, and moving related to becoming. But maybe we are becoming the same because we're moving places which look the same to do the same thing. So I would like to move to a more philosophical, anthropological dimension as well. This will be the plan, the very schematic plan I have Also, there is a question when you talk about that freedom is not related to the capacity to move in an efficient way, even in a meaningful way, but the choice. If moving, not moving, how to move, where to move, and how you relate this with the concept of kinetic elite by Creswell and so on. But I think he explains the same thing with a different word from a different point of view, but it seems that you are going to the same place with this.
Oh, I think my ideas are very similar to Creswell's ideas. He comes at it from a geographical point of view, obviously, but also including a lot of human science, and I come at it from an anthropological point of view. But yeah, we get that very similar ideas. Yeah.
Good. And maybe the last issue I would like to raise is about the most important one for us in the project, in our research, is to what extent a better understanding of mobility cultures will provide for a more sensitive political decisions. The answer is yes, but how we elaborate about that, how we convince that this is not just a wish, but it may have been practical.
In 5 minutes.
Yes, so this can be useful. Yeah. Let's say, not just for learning more, to know that we are wrong, to be sure that we are wrong, but how we can do something right by being, more, to understand better the cultural implications of mobility, which is what you have been working a lot of time, writing a lot. I don't know what you think about this plan. You want some changes? You would like to introduce something that you really want to talk?
No, I think if I want to introduce things, I will work them in anyway. And if there are some questions that I find more difficult, yeah, then I will try to escape from it. I mean, like a good politician.
or yes, or transform the question. Something that it is more interesting for you.
Yeah, because like you mentioned, this work of this Korean author that I haven't read, so of course I could not comment on the author himself. I could comment on some of these ideas, of course, but without having, yeah.
Okay, he's very pessimistic. He's very pessimist. Actually, I think he's writing the same things that Heidegger in a modern fashion with this Oriental touch. But it's mostly this kind of pessimistic view of modernity. But anyway, so I will not mention him very specifically then.
Yeah.
So I think we have just 2 minutes to go.
Yes.
So this is the
we are
place
going
where
to start.
no?
Sorry, one moment. Just for interruption, one moment. We are going to start in 2 minutes. Andreu, centra't a la imatge.
Com vols dir que em centri?
Estàs desplaçat.
M'he de centrar?
Ahí, exactly. D'ara?
Sí. Estic massa gran també, així.
Okay, now you are on the same side.
If I speak like this, the sound is okay?
Yes, the sound is okay, yes.
Okay. So be sure nobody in the office or around is making noise now in the next hour.
No, it's not a problem. I'm going to
because I'm listening to some people around now.
Okay, us avisaré ara.
Okay.
Vale. Doncs...
Oh, I don't have how I introduce you. My goodness, I forget. How I introduce you. Let me see, because I don't remember. You work in Leuven, I know. You're a professor at the Leuven University of Anthropology.
Yeah, professor of anthropology at KU Leuven is the official name.
Leuven.
KU Leuven is the official name, or University of Leuven.
University of Leuven.
Yeah.
And your last book, the one I bought and I don't have.
I don't know. Is it the one? Is it one that I authored, or is it one that I edited.
Not both. I bought both, but there is only one you. Only
The one, my last book that I wrote myself is Momentous Mobilities.
exactly Momentous Mobility. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is kind of poetry, I think, in a way.
It mixes different genres and things. It also talks about my own about my own mobilities, but it's mixed
exactly
with research in different continents.
Mobility momentum.
Momentous mobilities.
Momentous mobilities. Hi everybody again in Rebalance talk today with Noel Salazar, which is anthropologist, professor at Liberty University, and author of interesting books like Momentous Mobilities, which is not just a theory of mobility, but it's also a personal experience of himself moving, and a number of articles that we have in the website suggested as interesting readings for all of you. I was just reading yesterday, Theorizing Mobility Through Concepts and Figures, which is a really deep reflection on these issues. So, hi, Noel, thanks for being with us today here.
Thank you for the invitation, and I look forward to continuing reflecting here on issues related to mobility.
Great. We have been producing from all talks we had before a number of what we call claims. So hypotheses, actually. Hypotheses I would like to contrast with you, and I would like to know what you think about. The first is about our, I don't know if our understanding, our wish, or to what extent this is true, that we are witnessing a cultural change in mobility in Europe, but not only in Europe, but particularly in Europe. So we begin to understand, to be sure that mobility is not just a matter of providing useful services to people, but also mobility is an experience. People are living, at the same time they are moving. Therefore, it has a meaning for people. Do you think that this transformation from transport to mobility is something that is commonplace, that is becoming dominant, or is just restricted to an intellectual elite and some advanced politicians?
So you start already immediately with quite a complicated question that I need to unpack, and it's important. So you talk about cultural change in mobility in Europe, and so Europe, that's nice because it already limits it. It's not the whole world, it's Europe. Cultural change in mobility, then we need to, of course, explain what we mean by those terms. And in my own work, when I use the term mobility, I always explain what I understand, and I think it's very important, and that whenever we are talking about mobility, that we ask people to clarify what they are actually talking about, because mobility is a word that is used in many different contexts and can have quite a number of meanings. Just to give you an example, even within Europe and within the EU, there are particular frameworks, like mobility is often used also in contrast with migration. And so these are all different terms that have connotations, and it's important to realize what these connotations are. What is important, and I do this exercise actually because I teach also about mobility, and I ask my students in my first class, I actually do things the opposite way. I start with an exam. And so I tell them to do a free association exercise. And so I give them the word mobility, and they have to associate words that they link to it. And so this is actually very interesting, because then you see that most of us, when we think about mobility, we have rather positive associations. So it seems to be a positive type of word. And so it means very clearly it's not a value neutral word. I think transport as a term would be much more value neutral than mobility. Mobility has all kinds of values associated to it, and in most cases, for most people, these values are positive. It's linked, among others, also to change. There seems to be a very interesting link between mobility and change. And why is mobility such a popular word? I mean, we use it in academia, we use it among policymakers, also increasingly in the media we hear about mobility, because it's related to certain values. There's a certain linkage with the fact that people are being able to move, and that's so there's an idea of freedom associated with it. So that's a positive value. So that it is also easy. And of course, there is an important distinction that I, among other scholars, make. When we're talking about movement and about mobility, we're talking about different things, because mobility really has this meanings that are attached to movement. And so it's how we basically make movements meaningful that make it mobility. So movement is more an abstract physical term, like the physical act of movement, and mobility can go in much more directions. We also talk about virtual mobilities, but when we apply that to transport, what is very important is to make the distinction. When we're talking about transport, it's mostly people who are being moved. Most of what transport means, not all of them, but most of what transport means, and also how transport as a field was developed, was actually moving people around. And this is, of course, a very modern idea, because in the pre-modern times, people had to move, had to put a lot of effort into moving, because they had to walk, they had to go on horseback. So it was all a bit more difficult, and it required quite a bit of energy. And then transport is this idea, of course, with new technologies, that you can actually have machines that actually move people around. So it takes away quite a bit of the energy, and it also makes traveling around more comfortable. And so it makes it all nice, and also, of course, quicker, because technologies allow us to go quicker. But what is now being revealed, and I think the COVID-19 crisis made this even stronger, is that by moving or changing from people who are moving to people who are being moved in a passive way, so cars who bring people, or buses or trains or planes who move people around, that something has been lost. And what has been lost is of course, people who are engaging in self-propelled movements, or people who are moving themselves around, and this bodily activity also in the moving around. And it's very interesting how in a lot of urban context, you see many people who are, when the infrastructure allows it, are making these efforts to going back to biking, walking, to actually going back to these more active forms of movement. And this, of course, this already existed. People were doing this already in their free time, in the leisure time. But now you see that more and more also people are trying to do this in like the work to home mobilities, this going back to actually these more active forms of movement, which shows that, and this is of course what many sciences have proven, that moving, or the act of being in motion, is of course very important to living beings, not just to humans, to animals, to, I mean, our world is actually always in motion, and so people too have to be in motion. And so transport in that sense is a rather unnatural thing, because you are being moved, but you are not yourself doing the effort, and sometimes you don't even notice, or you barely notice that you are moving. And so this is definitely one change that you can see that is going on in terms of movement. But of course, as I said, if there are changes and if there are people interested in making changes because they feel certain needs, then there are, of course, and I mentioned infrastructure, of course, there needs to be a structure and an infrastructure that actually allows this to be possible. When I'm talking about biking, there's a lot of people who have an interest in biking, but of course you would need adequate infrastructure to actually allow that. And this is just one example, but this idea of recognizing that being actively in motion is actually something what people also need, and actually this is what we clearly saw also during the lockdowns. You know, the lockdowns when the coronavirus crisis started, that in many countries people were not allowed to do many things, but they were allowed, like in Belgium where I live, people were allowed to walk, to cycle, and to run. And you see that people massively also did that, and that many people were also rediscovering how good it is to actually engage in these active forms of movement, how good it is to your body and to your mental health. And so to a certain extent, maybe the lockdowns have been a blessing in disguise for making people aware of certain things. Now, whether we should or could call that a cultural change, that's of course open for debate. And if there are processes of change, then of course these processes of change may have started, but they are ongoing. I mean, it's definitely not something that is finished. But cultural change would of course indicate that it's a wider group of people that is willing or open to do certain things. And then of course, as an anthropologist, I always have to point out that it is very important to be aware of the huge differences and inequalities within societies, because of course what people do and how people do things is very much also determined by where they are positioned in society, and this is influenced by their social class, by their education, by their gender, by their race. I mean, there's all these parameters that basically also influence what is possible and what is not possible.
Mm-hmm. So I understand active mobility is a signal, or is a consequence, or is part of the cultural change in a way we are witnessing today. Let me ask you about other elements which we see that maybe are new or relatively new, like the slow movement on the media, like the slow food movement, you know, by Carlo Petrini, or the traffic calm movement, the traffic calm and the environmental songs that were advocated by Jane Jacobs in the 60s, or even popular songs that are telling us the importance of not running as fast as possible without knowing where we are going. Plenty of songs like this, or you know, books, novels like The Slowness by Milan Kundera. So do you see that there are around this kind of ideas becoming more present in the way we think, in the way we feel, in the way we live, or is just our wish that this is happening?
Yeah, so speed is a concept that became very important in the modern era, and it's of course linked to processes of industrialization, and together with that efficiency. So becoming more efficient also means that you do things quicker, and so that also involves transport. So doing things quicker, and of course I actually recently co-published a book with a Canadian colleague of mine, which we called Pacing Mobilities, where we actually unpack and we reflect upon the importance of pace, because when we're talking about speed, it's very important also to put that next to the concept of pace. And maybe a concept that will ring a bell to many people is this idea of pace of life, because many people are reacting towards ideas of speed because there is a certain pace of life that they feel is being disturbed when things are too quick, but also too slow. I mean, too slow is of course also a possibility. So it's very interesting that there seems to be a pace in which we do things, and so this can go from walking. When you are walking, on the street with other people, sometimes you may not feel at ease because it's not like your pace. So the group is walking slower than your own pace or quicker than your own pace. So there's something about a certain feeling that we have with pace. And we also, we have that with many processes that are happening around us, that it feels unnatural. And of course, when we are talking about active forms of mobility, this is related to heart rate, and it's related to breathing, and it's related to all things that our body immediately feels, but also in a more abstract mental and psychological way. The same kind of ideas apply when people are working and are being also now the use of technologies, modern technologies, and this constant beeps on their phones and devices, and it's creating this feeling that things are happening too quick, and our brain has not enough time to actually process this, and so there are all these reactions against speed, and then of course there are these movements to do things slower, and so you have a lot of slow movements, and so you mentioned a couple of them. But I think it's important to point out that, and this is very interesting, how historically we have witnessed a change. So before the modern era and before processes of mechanization and industrialization, things were much slower. And so a lot of processes have been invented to speed up things. And so speed was a luxury. So the people that had access to these technologies, they could benefit, and this was seen as this is the good thing now. And now we are actually moving into a new phase where actually speed is being criticized more and more, and in many different domains of life. And actually there is even sometimes a nostalgic feeling of slowness, and going back often to imagined slowness of how it must have been before. And sometimes it is imagined, sometimes it's not. It wasn't like that, but people tend to have these imaginaries. And it's what is interesting here is that I always say that slowness now is a luxury. There's a lot of people who would maybe like to be slower, but that they don't have the resources to do that. And so you see that if now people engage in slowness, many people are limited to engage in slowness during their free time, because that's the time that they can control, and there they can decide to do things slower. So that's why you have slow tourism and slow food, and all these things. And in many cases happens during the free time of people. It's much harder to imply these ideas of slowness in work life, because many people are not allowed to be slower. I mean, think of all the lorry drivers now that have to deliver all our packages that we order online. They maybe would also like to be slower, and maybe many of these people would also like to do this thing while biking and enjoying things a bit more, but they are just not allowed, because they're on this very strict time schedules. And so to a certain extent it is in many parts it's still wishful thinking. It's very hard to implement in the world outside of the recreational.
Yeah, Noel, I would like you to elaborate a little bit more on your concepts of staying attached to belonging and identity, and moving related to becoming, which seems to me a really profound and meaningful way of understanding what you also call mobilities and immobilities. May you further elaborate on these concepts, please?
Yeah, these are difficult concepts. They are philosophical concepts that we need to unpack. And of course, in this context, mobility and immobility can also be used in a very metaphorical way. It's very interesting how mobility is, of course, a metaphor that is used to describe our life. Many people describe also their lives as if it were a journey. And so life in and of itself is associated with the journey. And so this is all about mobility. And so if you do that, then of course immobility, which is the opposite, is the negative opposite. So the extreme form is the most extreme form of immobility in life is, of course, when you die. Then you become totally immobile. But of course, everything that is immobile has a negative connotation to it. Also, think about people who are disabled and so who are limited in their mobility. So this is, of course, mostly seen as a very negative thing, because mobility is often almost always in this binary seen as the good thing, and immobility then the bad thing. What is very interesting is that again, COVID-19 has made us reflect on that, because when we were in this periods of lockdown, then immobility, or the fact that many people were limited in their movements, was also to a certain extent a positive thing, because it protected you. The people who had the luxury to be in lockdown and to stay in the safety of their homes, that was a luxury. And they could only do that because there was another part of society who was forced to be very mobile. And again, to make sure that society kept on functioning and made it possible for all these other people to stay actually in the comfort of their homes. Now, linking that with ideas of belonging and becoming, these are, of course, these are huge philosophical terms, and I mean, we could spend hours talking about this. But when you link that to mobility, it's very interesting, and it's probably also linked to the idea and the growth of the nation state. When the world was developing in a world of nation states, then these nation states had, of course, to distinguish themselves from neighboring nation states. And so the idea, one of the ways that this was being done is by stressing a lot the idea of belonging and belonging to a nation state, because there's many forms of belonging. But belonging to a nation state is actually a very strong one. And this is a scale that right now is influencing actually a lot, and a lot of the policies are of course national policies. Even if within the EU, some of things are moving to the EU level, but a lot of the decisions are still taken at the national level. And then becoming is an idea, of course, of transgressing borders. And so one of these borders can, of course, be a national or a nation state border. And becoming is also, again, if you think of the life metaphor, we are in a process of becoming, and we constantly evolve. We are a baby, become a toddler, and become a child, adolescent, and then we are in the process of becoming. But we also have that in terms of the projects that we have with our life. We want to become, and we want to have the freedom to choose what we want to become. And so migration is, of course, a part of that kind of element. Migration, but also tourism is also, I mean, a lot of mobilities, or a lot of meanings that are attached to movements have to do with ideas of becoming. We are doing certain things because we are hoping that what we are doing and these mobilities in which we are engaging will help us to grow in something. Because becoming is, again, this is a very positive term, and it's associated with positive ideas. And so the hope is that a lot of mobilities in which people are engaging, like migration, like tourism, like exchange students, like people who go abroad for a work experience, that all of these mobilities will have a positive outcome. And the positive outcome can be economic, earning more money. It can be social, earning respect in your circles, and also on your social media platforms. And also cultural, in terms of becoming more open-minded, becoming more of a cosmopolitan, becoming more open. And so that's why a lot of people are engaging in this boundary crossing mobilities with the hope that it will help them to become something that they are actually envisioning. And so that can, of course, be filled in many different ways.
Okay, no, you have been presenting the positive side of becoming let me ask you about the negative side of becoming, in the sense that maybe by excessive mobility, by moving too much, but getting too much data, but no information or knowledge, by a lot of communication without community, let's say, by moving all around as efficient and fast as possible, maybe we are becoming the same. Maybe we're going to the same place to do the same things, same clothes with the same stress, and at the end, let's say we are becoming standard beings. There is a cultural standardization which has attached to excessive mobility. This is true that excessive mobility can make us to become, let's say, standardized.
Well, when you talk about excessive mobility, of course, too much of something is never good. So also too much mobility is not a good thing. But whether that leads to standardization and people becoming the same, there, of course, I would have to question that. And I'm thinking back on the 1990s, when there was this burgeoning literature of globalization, and particularly there also there was this huge worry that with all kind of processes becoming global, that this would actually make the world become very similar and all standard, and it would all be the same. And so there were all these predictions, what would be the outcome of that. But what we see in practice, and this is still an ongoing thing, that whenever there are these processes and whenever people feel or are afraid that this may happen, then there is a severe backlash, and people are reacting, and people are even reinforcing differences that may have existed, or maybe inventing new ones to actually stress that they are different. And this is what you clearly see going on also now, and also at the European level. From the moment people feel this is coming, and whether this is real or imagined, it doesn't matter. People will actually react to this. And one of the things I have been thinking about as a way to explain it is that when we are talking about processes of standardization, we are also talking about making things bigger. So groups of people or places becoming bigger. I mean, globalization is, of course, the maximum, then processes that are all around the globe. And this scale is something that our brain is not evolved to. I mean, our brain is not made to be thinking and to be considering things at the global scale. So this scale is just too big in the end. We are animals, whether we like it or not, and we are social animals, and our social group cannot be the world because our brain cannot process this. And this makes it also increasingly difficult to be addressing the challenges of this planet, because a lot of the challenges of this planet are global, and a lot of the solutions are global. It's not to be solved at the individual, let's stand local or regional or national level. It needs to be handled at the global level. But this is a scale that people cannot handle. It's just too big. And think about climate change. It seems all so abstract. People cannot deal with these scales that are so far removed from what they experience. Of course, when the effects of climate change are becoming very real in the personal lives of people, yeah, then people are maybe reacting, but then it's maybe too late already.
Let me now ask you about the issue of being, of belonging, because according to some philosophers and sociologists, anthropologists, we live in a world that we are in a way not just moving fast, but we are not more accelerated, but we live in a world desynchronized. So we go from weekend to weekend, and then the summertime, and then we end our period of work and we get retired. So our life is kind of simplified in terms of milestones, we don't have the rituals, the ritualized life that still you can see in Bhutan. You go there, you know, the community matters a lot, and not much the individual, and they have rituals that make strong the community and your feeling of belonging to this community, being part of this community. And then at the end, you have a way to explain yourself. So you have a narrative of your life. And according to some philosophers and sociologists, we live in a world that is not just accelerated, it is desynchronized. So we have problems to explain what we are doing, the meaning of our lives, and this is because we not only go fast, but we go without much order, following a order we don't understand, and this is mostly because of communication, excessive movement, excessive wish to be efficient and to do too many things and to transform even ourselves, and not to be able to recognize the limits of everything. What is your understanding of this position?
Yes, I think this is a right assessment, and trying to explain what this is all about is a bit trickier. And when you're talking about a lack of synchronization, we are again back to an idea of pace of life, and this feeling that something is wrong. Something is wrong. And I think that a lot of what is wrong is an outcome of this modern idea that this creation of the human, think of the Renaissance, and really a creation of the human as something different from nature, and the concepts that we have actually developed when we are talking about environment is environment something that is around us, not realizing that we are part of the environment. So environment is actually a wrong term, but it's the outcome, of course, of thinking processes that see the human as something different. And it's very interesting then, as an anthropologist, to be looking at a lot of cultures around the world, particularly indigenous cultures, where they have a very, very different worldview, where the human is not different, and where there's a much stronger realization and acknowledgement that we are part of something that is actually much bigger. And there's more and more research, interdisciplinary research, that actually shows this. Within anthropology, there is what we call multi-species anthropology or ethnography, where it's about doing research on the relation between humans and other species. And this is, of course, very tricky methodologically, because how do you do this? It's also drawing on a lot of research within biology that actually shows this idea that we have and that we take from Darwin, that nature is in competition, and that it's animal against animal, species against species, and it's the survival of the fittest. What you actually see that in a lot of processes on this planet, it's not about competition, which is of course also very capitalist idea and neoliberal idea. It's not about competition, it's about collaboration. And nature only thrives when it collaborates. And so you see a lot of fantastic examples, and maybe one of the most fantastic examples is this networks of trees and fungi. There's a lot of research and a lot of preoccupation around the world now for trees that are being cut, and how bad this is, and people have this sense of needing trees. And of course, it's easy to react towards the disappearance of trees, because trees are something that we see. The fungi and their underground networks is something that we don't see. And so we also don't realize the consequences of that. But trees can actually only thrive because of these fungi networks, underground networks that connect them. and actually transport things. And these are very mobile networks. I mean, talking about mobility, I mean, the whole of nature, of course, is actually about mobility. And so this is now being discovered in Western science, but a lot of this knowledge has been around for ages in actually other cultures. And so it's very interesting how our Western science paradigm is actually catching up, maybe a bit late, but is catching up with a lot of insights that have been around. And it's very interesting to see how scientifically now it's being corroborated what other people have been knowing and have been sharing through stories, through myths, to all kind of ways of sharing knowledge. And it's, I think, this is also what people express through actually wanting to reconnect this idea that feeling, you say desynchronized, but it's also feeling disconnected. It's feeling disconnected. And this is, of course, very ironic in an age where we have incredible transport networks, incredible communication networks. And this is the age where people feel most disconnected possible. And this is, of course, disconnected from nature, but also disconnected from other people. The amount of loneliness that people have who are constantly in contact with other people, but they still feel extremely lonely. This losing the capacity to contact other people. I mean, these are very serious problems, and it's so many people attempt to reconnect, but many people have lost the tools to actually do so, either socially, also to, I mean, how do we establish this reconnection with nature? There's all kind of naive ideas to do this, and there's all kind of things that are imported from other cultures. Think about a lot of people in Europe are now importing Japanese ideas of the forest hugging, going in the forest and establishing this physical contact with trees. I mean, there's all these ideas that are being imported, but it's to a certain extent very dramatic, because it's realizing that we have lost a lot of skills that we must once have had, or the human must once have had, to actually connect, and that this is lost or in the process of being lost.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let's move to the idea of mobility and justices, as we tend to understand today. You have emphasized that the injustice is mostly related to the lack of choice. So mobility justice is related to giving people the choice to move or not to move, or when to move. Before you said that sometimes not moving or moving slowly is a luxury. So it's a matter of quality as well. Quality of life sometimes is related to move slowly, or just to stay in a given place. I would like you to further elaborate on that. I have two samples of these in mind, which maybe are paradoxical in a way. One was the injustice in the US in the beginning of the 20th century, with Black populations in southern states, when they were using public transport. So they don't have the right to have a seat, or they have to give the seat to a white person that board the bus afterwards, or whatever. When these people were able to buy a car, and they were able to drive wherever they wanted with their own car, they had the I think the feeling of becoming, as you say, somebody else. So having not like the community they were living look at them, but just because they were able to move, because they were able to buy a car, they had this feeling of freedom, of becoming, having the opportunity to become somebody different. Or the situation of women in Saudi Arabia, they don't have the right to drive a car, I think. So for these women, the system is really not just. It's not just for them, because it's a way of being sure that they remain the same. So they don't go where the husband or their father don't know. So they have to stay. They have, as you say, they have to be what they are, but they belong to the father or to the husband in a way. So could you please explain a little bit more all these justices and injustices of mobility related to your I think your really clever concepts of being, belonging, becoming.
Yeah, one of the things that I have written about and have reacted against is, of course, the ideology that is behind a lot of mobility thinking, and that is to see mobility as actually the norm and the freedom. And so that the problem is that mobility is not accessible to everyone. So basically seeing mobility as the norm. And of course, there are a lot of inequalities related to access to forms of mobility. This is undeniably so. But I also want to stress that it's not that all the people want to be mobile or want to be mobile all the time. A lot of mobilities are mobilities also out of necessity, but people don't necessarily want them. I mean, think about migration. If people in the places where they are would be living in good conditions, they would probably not want to migrate. The reason why people want to migrate is of course because they are hoping that the places that they are migrating to will allow them to live better lives or establish better lives for their children. And then migration is an outcome of that. And so this is the reason why I have reacted towards this idea that the freedom is mobility. I'm stressing always that the freedom is not mobility. The freedom is actually the choice that people have whether they want to be mobile or not at certain points. And it's basically that. So the people who have most control of when they want to move and how they want to move, I mean, that's where the real freedom lies. And many people don't have that. But of course, then going back to when people make the decisions to be mobile, there's plenty of inequalities. And as soon as you move, you are confronted with inequalities. And again, so these inequalities are related to your position in this world, and your position is influenced by all these parameters that I mentioned before. It's linked to your social class, your nationality, your religion, your gender, I mean, all these parameters have an influence, and this of course becomes very clear when you move country borders, and when you need, this documentation, passports. I mean, passports are of course an element of discrimination. And it's not passports, it's of course categories, because when we're talking about moving people, we divide them up in categories. And these labels are not neutral labels. Think about the EU discourse. EU has a discourse where they talk about migration, and migration in the EU discourse is actually reserved to people from outside of the EU who actually move to the inside. Mobility in the EU discourse is actually about exactly the same movements, but it's EU citizens who are migrating from one EU country to another EU country, and that's then called mobility. And of course, these labels are not neutral, because a migrant in this day and age has a very negative connotation. Nobody wants to be called a migrant, but a mobile EU citizen, and that sounds already something quite different. And so there's also a lot of violence and injustice in the kind of labels that we are using. And so in my writings also, I want to make people aware of how we label things and how we name things is not a neutral thing again. This has also connotations, and it enhances these injustices that are actually all around us. And so these labels are things that we should be very much preoccupied with. And with these labels come privileges, because I mean, think of passports and visas. So a migrant visa comes with certain things. A tourist visa comes with certain things. I mean, there's a reason why many migrants enter countries on tourist visa. because with the tourist visa, you know, it's there's less restrictions, and so there's of course there's this playing around with labels, and there's very interesting research when people who are labeled in a certain way, when they are asked about, you know, what they would like to be called. And of course, the answer is that nobody wants to be labeled. We all want to be treated as individual people, you know, with our own agendas of becoming, you know, and our own life projects. And the labeling is, of course, always very limiting, and it's to a certain extent grouping people and not becoming aware of the fact that there are also many differences within those groups.
Let me go back to the first question. Maybe the order is, but this is kind of a spontaneous thing, you know. It's just I'm just making questions based on your answers, and I have in mind now that when we discuss about the change in the culture of mobility, the changes, I asked you if we are witnessing meaningful changes, and you explain as the active mobility as one clue to understand maybe what's happening new right now. Let's be a little bit deeper on that in making clear the difference between changes in the behavior, like active mobility could be, and changes in the values. So our understanding on our perception that what's right, what's wrong. So do you think that in this world, let's say, where transport and technology transport technology energy is moving so fast, and technology changing continuously, and we are in the middle of a exponential revolution in terms of technology, our behaviors may also change quicker than before. Maybe we can influence the behaviors, maybe we are forced to change the behavior, whatever, but values remain the same? Or do you think opposite way, that we are forced to have the same behavior? Let's say we are forced to take the car every day because we live in the suburb and we have to go to the city center, but our values are changing, and we feel bad because we are, you know, driving a car in the middle of the city. So there is a lot of, you know, dissonance, cognitive dissonance, because we are doing things that we should not be doing, because our values and our behaviors are not changing in parallel, but you know, in a disorganized way.
Yeah, this is a difficult one to answer. Of course, we have a lot of technologies at our disposal, and technologies are tools. They should never become the end goal. They are tools, and they help us with certain things. Like you have transport technologies, communication technologies. They help us, and so what you basically see that in a lot of the fields that are very important in our lives, there have been incredible technological developments. These developments are really happening very quickly. I mean, if you look at it in a historical scale and you see how much technology has changed our lives in just the last 100 years, and you compare that to 10,000 years ago, there were also technological developments, but they happen at a much slower pace. And so these technologies are happening in a very, very quick pace. And so again, we are limited because we are animals. We have a body, we have a brain as part of the body, and so our brain is not able to adapt so quickly to these technological changes. Our brain is much slower. It would take much longer to actually adapt, and that's why also there is this discordance between what is possible on the technological level and how we can cope with this. On the one hand, as a human, based on our constitution, on how we are built, on how our body is built, But together with how the body is built is, of course, there's another element, and this is the fact that we are social animals, and so we are part of groups of people. And groups of people develop what in the history we have called societies or cultures. And so these groups share groups of values. And when we talk about values in the ethical sense of, what is good, what is proper, what is desirable, what is needed for actually having a good functioning society, values, like many things that people create in a social or cultural way, change on a slower pace. Values don't change quickly. They take time to change because humans are innately, and this is a typical thing, are innately resistant to change. Why? Because change may bring you to a situation that you don't know. And if you have to choose between a situation that you know and don't know, people tend to stick to the situation that they know, even if it's not necessarily a good one, because the one of opting for the change is opting for not knowing what the outcome will be. And so there's risk involved, and people try to minimize risk. And so because of that behavior, it's very hard to impose change. And this is, of course, where it becomes tricky, because a lot of technology that we are implementing and we want to introduce is of course, to a certain extent, imposing changes to people, because the people that have invented technologies are not experts in actually assessing how people will react to this, or all these elements that I have just been mentioning. And so this, of course, points when we are talking about future, is that you need to work much more interdisciplinary. There's so many aspects that you need to take into account when you want to introduce change. And we see that very clearly now. We are experiencing a strange period where some things are imposed on people. And you see how this is backfiring now, how there's protests and things, and because people don't like change. But at the same time also, and this was very interesting at the beginning of the coronavirus crisis, a lot of people were very hopeful, because it is true that periods of crisis are actually accelerators of change, because this is not normal. And people are very much willing then to undertake risk in a crisis situation, much more than in the situation where there is no crisis. And you can see that there's historical analysis of people in war periods, and where you have much more leeway as a society to actually change things. But then you need to be on the ball, and you need to know how to do that, and that requires quite some collaborative research. I'm thinking of the period you were mentioning before, the US history. I was thinking about the US during the Second World War, where basically, so at that time, people already had lots of cars in the US, and the car was a symbol of freedom. And it was very important for people to have cars. And so these cars needed fuel. And so during the Second World War, actually, the government needed a lot of resources and a lot of fuel and things like that for the war machinery. And so they needed to find ways to motivate people, use your car less, and so that we can have more fuel to use for the whole war machine. And this I don't have time to go over this now, but it's very interesting historical research that analyzes these campaigns. How as a government, what kind of tools do you use to motivate your people to actually give up some of their privileges and some of their the things that they really value as important. And of course, in a situation of crisis, this is easier done than in a situation where people don't perceive crisis.
Mm-hmm. Great, Noel. We are just about, unfortunately, but I cannot be so selfish to ask you only my own question. So I'm going to take one question from the friends and colleagues which are writing a number of questions. On this one, I have to go closer to the screen because I cannot read otherwise. And this question is going to be a surprise for myself.
Mhm.
So let me see. It's a long question by Matteo Turroa, a friend of us. We are reviewing the traditional use of the value of travel time. He's saying, the point I would like to argue is that the time has an intrinsic value, probably related to life expectancy, and the value we give to it comes on top or below of it in terms of the utility or disutility of what we do with the time. So time has an intrinsic value, regardless the usefulness of it for us. We may thus related value of life and the value of time, but we should, so in a way, it's not just a matter of quality, also it's a matter of quantity. But we should be able to give a value to the utility of the travel time if we use this time to work, to enjoy the travel, or we are suffering from uncomfortable conditions. Then we can value travel time properly. This is complicated, but probably the only way to include slow mobility in the evaluation models. Would you agree in this line of thought? I think Matteo is trying to see how we can integrate meaning into the useful value of time. And this is going to difficult philosophical questions, because in a way he's saying that there is an intrinsic value, kind of an essence of time, which is somehow to be integrated into the existence value of time. So it's kind of complicated questions at the end.
No, but I understand what he is saying, and it makes quite a lot of sense to me. I mean, people are very much aware of the fact that our life is limited in time, and so that means that what we do with the time, of course, the more time we can spend on doing things that we value, the better we will experience the quality of our life. And so if you apply that to transport and the fact that people have to work, and so they have to spend time to actually also get to their work, you know, if you talk about this daily movements back and forth to work, just to take one example, if that time spent in that transport is not experienced as valuable, then it's very frustrating. And it's even more frustrating if you are in your car and you are in this huge traffic jam, you know, then and so people try to make this meaningful. And so of course in the traffic jam people try to make this meaningful, but then reading the newspaper or checking things on their phone, or you know, they always try to add meaning to it. And so other people now are trying to actually to do this transport to their work, to actually move it into a more active form of movement, like cycling to work. And now with the e-bikes, of course, people can do this for longer distances as a way also to make this time more meaningful. And I think this is, of course, this can be done in many ways, but I think this is, of course, important, that transport is not just seen as let's make it as comfortable as possible or whatever. No, it also should be meaningful. If people find it meaningful, of course, then they will also be willing to actually accept it much better, and maybe also be more open to actually do this for longer times, spend more time in traffic, because what they're doing is actually meaningful.
Yeah. Interesting. Let me ask you the last question. How a better understanding of mobility cultures may provide for a more human sensitive political decisions? And the last question was very, I think, interesting as a reference for my last question, because we know for sure that better understanding of mobility cultures will provide for a more sensitive political decision. That's obvious, but how? So it seems that still political decisions are too much embedded into kind of orthodox economic understanding of utility, too much technocratic. It seems that one thing is what we feel, the other thing is what we approve. it seems that at the level of rhetorics, maybe we are sensitive to new mobility cultures, but in the actual things we do, we remain too much with the previous inerties. Do you see that there is a kind of gap in between what we think, what we feel, what we are talking, and then the policies we see applied, implemented in practice?
Well, I think what is important to realize, and it's maybe going back to this example that I gave about nature, and we are part of nature, that the way nature works is that nature survives and is very flexible because it has developed systems of collaboration. There's this very intricate and very old systems of species and parts of nature that are collaborating. Well, now when it comes to policies, be it mobility policies or other policies, it should be exactly the same. And it's always realizing that issues are complex and should be related and should always be seen in relation to other things. And so that also means when you are talking about transport policies or mobility policies, be it in an urban context or on a larger scale, also these problems or issues cannot be seen separate. And so if you only have transport people to solve transport issues, that will not solve the issue, because transport issues are related to other issues, and in an urban context, mobility issues are related to other issues. And so you always need to have this interdisciplinary approaches, and you always need to have a very healthy balance between experts, people who really know a lot about a very small but specific area, and then generalists, people who are able to see in a more holistic way how these different experts islands are actually connected and how they influence one another. And so that means that effective policy making takes more time, but in the long run, of course, will be much more sustainable. I mean, if you go for the quick and efficient, then maybe it will work, but it will not be very sustainable. If you want to work towards issues and policies that are sustainable, it requires more work, because you have to involve more parties and you have to listen more, and you have to try to make this puzzle, this complex puzzle, you know, to see how these different pieces fit. And so it's a lot about collaboration. And so this is something that we all have to learn more. We have, many of us are trained to be experts because the expert model is what is being valued, and expertise is definitely needed in this world. But we need also people who connect these different expertises into the puzzle. And so there's not only the pieces of the puzzle, but there's also the glue that connects, you know, these different pieces of the puzzle, and that then makes sure that once the puzzle is made, that it stays made, you know, and that it doesn't disintegrate.
Thank you, Noel. Well, first, I apologize for all friends and colleagues which are that were listening to us. I was unable to take so many questions that we had for this talk, but I hope all of you enjoyed that much as myself the talk with Noel, and learn a lot, but mostly we enjoy a lot. So it was a great hour. So thank you very much, Noel, for your time with us, for your ideas, and please keep writing. You know, I waiting answers from your last book, Momentous Mobility, I bought weeks ago, and you know, I don't have the book, and it's hard for me to, you know, to wait. So in a way, this is slow movement in relation to my wish to have your book is not working for me. Thank you very much for your time, Noel.
Thank you very much, and I hope this is useful, and I wish you all the best with the rest of your project.
Thank you very much, Noel. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Be in contact.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.